Welcome to this very special session on the first day of the Abu Dhabi International Book Fair. I'm Amandeep Bangu. I'm an international journalist. I used to work for the BBC. So I come from the world of factual storytelling, but fiction is my first love, and I'm always in awe of writers. So I'm thrilled to be part of today and to interview two authors about the fantasy worlds they've created for us to enjoy. Now, let's kick off with a quote, and who better than Dr. Seuss? Dr. Seuss has described fantasy as a necessary ingredient in living. He said, it's a way of looking at life through the wrong end of a telescope. Now, I can't have picked two better people to look through the wrong end of a telescope with us today. And I think you'll probably agree that maybe we've all been living in the pandemic and looking through the wrong end of a telescope for the last year. First off, to introduce from the States, in Oregon, the famous fantasy writer Brent Weeks. Now, Brent, he's behind no less than 8 New York Times best-selling novels. You'll know him for the Night Angel trilogy, the Lightbringer series, which have been translated to 19 languages, I believe, and sold millions of copies. So welcome, Brent.
Thank you. It's a delight to be here.
And also from America to Abu Dhabi, we're joined by the UAE celebrity Ahmed Booker. Now, Ahmed, he's got an amazing creative range, which we're going to dive into. But just to give you a bit of a flavor, he's one of the top 10 in the world nasheed singers, Islamic devotional singing, a businessman, and more recently, he's turned his hand to writing. So welcome to you, Ahmed, and let's kick off with you, because I'm just really curious. From international singer, and I believe you've performed to over 45,000 people in my home city of London, to now turning your hand to writing. Why? And compare those two creative outlets. Okay, while we get that checked out, we can maybe move on to Brent, because we can ask Brent about his creative process. Now, Brent, I imagine it's evolved a lot. Your first book in the Night Angel trilogy, it came out over 13 years ago. So it's safe to say your writing process has probably evolved. But what's changed when it comes to the elaborate world building process that you go through?
Well, I like to join William Faulkner, who said he only writes when inspiration strikes him. And he makes sure that inspiration strikes every day at 9 a.m. I'm afraid
we've got a bit of a technical glitch here. We can't seem to hear our speakers. So we're just going to get that checked out. We can't hear our speakers. We're just going to get that checked out. I've got the gentleman here doing so. So just bear with us. What we'll do is, if everyone's patient, the time that we're taking to do our little tech checks, we can add that on to the end. I think we're allowed to do that if everyone has got the ability to do that today. I want to respect your time. While we just ensure that we can hear you guys, because I think you can hear me, I'm just going to say that with the books, I'm just getting a thumbs up. So I'm getting told that things are good. So maybe, Ahmed, shall we go to you first of all? Do you want to give us an insight? Do you want to give us an insight into?
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. So the comparison, to repeat the question, the comparison between singing and writing.
Right. First of all, thank you for that lovely introduction, Amandeep. And I'm so happy to be here. I mean, I was happy more to be there on the stage with you, but that's fine. Zoom works for me as well. You know, Amandeep, singing is more like saying a story, you know, telling a story, we can say that, right? So when you want to pitch a song, what happens is that it is an incident that you go through, or maybe something that's happening in the world that actually we feel that thing happening, you know, and then you create the lyrics, and then you compose the music, and then you sing it out, you know, with your heart to the world, and people get to, you know, feel your feelings through that, and there I believe that this is a way for me to tell a story, and I've been doing this like 20 years now, alhamdulillah. And when coming to the writing, okay, it's since childhood. I remember I've seen a movie in 1984, The Never Ending Story. It was about a warrior, trying to save a princess, and that warrior was traveling on a dragon. I think it was a Chinese dragon at that time. So that was the first time I've seen a movie in my life, and the whole imagination process and how things, were portrayed in the movie. I was like, wow, what's happening, And since then, I started getting all these ideas in my head about, these creatures and monsters and wizards and witches and dragons, and every time there was a fantasy movie, I would actually, like, at that time I was used to rent it out, from a video shop, or maybe when Harry Potter was out, or maybe the Lord of the Rings was out, I was the first one there, and it just was amazing to see how in the movies they took the books and they made it into reality. So it was one of my shows in Canada in 2010. I was traveling to Canada to perform a show, and on that flight I saw a movie called How to Train Your Dragon, and I loved that movie. And at the end of when I was reading the credits, it was actually adapted from a book, and I was like, "What? It's adapted from a book? So you can write this, and then you can actually see this on the silver screen?" And the moment I landed, my sound engineer was waiting for me so we can go and do a sound check. I said, to hell with sound check, let's go to the next bookshop. I want to buy this book and I want to read it. And I remember entering the bookshop, and the lady sitting in the reception, I asked her about the book, and she looked at me like, from head to toe, and she said that, "Why would you want to be reading a children's book?" I said, "I don't know, I just want to read it." And I went up to the children's section and I read it, and from then I started creating the world and the whole image characters I had in my head, and I started writing. And I remember I took off my job, my daily job. I sat at home and I wrote for a full year, and apparently I had 2 books in my hand. That's how I started writing.
Oh, wow. That's such an amazing insight. And I feel like you've covered so much there, because you've talked about the fantastical worlds that you created and also the characters as well. I'm going to give Brent a chance to answer that first question I asked there. Brent, just a quick recap, how your writing process has evolved, and also an insight into how you do your elaborate world building, because of course, as a New York Times bestseller, we want your secrets.
Well, to a certain degree, I do what William Faulkner said, and he said, "I only write when inspiration strikes, and I make sure it strikes every day at 9 a.m." So a part of my life really hasn't changed at all. Every day it is me and the page, and that is a very humbling thing. It's like every day there's a struggle between you and telling the story that you hope to tell. And as you refine your skills, you simply take on harder challenges. So in many ways, my life is the same. I sit down every day and write. I for many years, for about 12 years, I was writing 6 days a week, because as you get published, it turns out you pick up a second kind of full-time job. There's the writing, and then there's the being a professional writer and doing promotional things and figuring out you have to have a web page and you have to host content and you have to talk to fans. And if you're very fortunate, you get fan mail, and it feels awfully rude not to respond to mail and until at some point you get too much and you simply can't respond to it. So the technical things of managing these worlds, as fantasy worlds tend to have very many characters, tend to have a lot of detail. That I wish I had some really intricate and beautiful system that was simple, whereby I could find things. I have notes everywhere. I keep a lot of it in my head. But then when you get with Lightbringer, I took about 12 years to write Lightbringer, and after you get past about 1 million words, you start to forget things. So Lightbringer is about 1.5 million words long, and it slows you down. So any of these big long series where people have been thinking, gee, why is it taking so long for that writer to finish their books? It's like when you're in book 1 and 2, you get to just make up stuff, and oh yeah, his grandfather was this, and then 600 pages later you say, and his grandmother was this other thing, and then you get 2 more books in, and you think, wait, and I said that happened right then, and so his grandmother and grandfather got married when she was 2. Oh no. So it does get very complicated, and I now have an assistant who sometimes can look things up for me, because I can ask her, can you see what I said about this and this from, across all these hundreds of pages? So I do have some help, but a lot of it is just hard work. It's just like, what did I say about this before? And I do keyword searches, and I try to keep things straight. And sometimes you mess up little details, and fans will let you know. You said she was a blonde in that book, and in this book, she's a brunette. And you're like, man, was that the most important thing to you? But the larger things you do have to keep in hand, and that's part of the work of it. It's not terribly glamorous, but keeping details straight is very difficult. Yeah.
That's so fascinating. I really appreciate you giving us that insight. I know, Brent, there you quoted 1 million words plus, but we can give you some reminders, certainly from the first book. And I'm going to stay with you, Brent, for just a moment, because I really want to bring in the theme today, beyond belief, and exploring how sci-fi, I know you both write fantasy, but fantasy, sci-fi, how it interacts with faith and belief systems. And to just quote from your beginning of your 1 million words, from chapter 51, an exchange between 2 of the main characters. No spoilers in this session, but the exchange goes, do you know why faith is harder for us? A little bit further on, because we know ourselves, because others obey us as though we were gods, and we know we're not. We see the fragility of our own power, and through it, we see the fragility of every other link. Now, I'm going to leave it on that kind of cryptic note for other people to delve into the actual plot. But expanding on that quote and maybe talking a bit more widely about belief systems, moral systems, Brent, if you can kick that off, and then I'm going to bring in Ahmed on that same point as well.
Well, one of the things I love about fantasy is that it gives as broad of a canvas to paint upon as you would like. There's really only one rule, I think, in all writing, in all fiction writing, and that's that readers have to keep turning pages. So in fantasy, it's I can make up whatever I want as long as it's interesting enough for my readers. And here I had questions about. I'd been reading a lot of medieval history. I love to read history. And I was reading about Borgia, Italy, right? And so you have this period in Italy where you have all these families, and you have the papal states. And so you have some really awful popes. I mean, guys who are just bad guys, who are like probably barely Christians, and they're popes. And so how do you deal with organizations like the Catholic Church at the time that are good but have bad people in them? And we can think about this, generally today, like we have institutions that we believe are generally good, but do a lot of bad things. A lot of us come from, fairly privileged countries. We have a lot of power in the world, but we do bad things. And so it was a way for me in those books, it's no spoiler to say, the main character is sort of a kind of a papal emperor kind of guy. So sort of an emperor of Japan kind of person, say in the 1600s. He's sort of political and sort of religious. And he's so he's kind of the head of the church, and he's agnostic. He doesn't believe in any of it. He thinks it's all crap. And yet he knows his power, all the power that they have rests upon everybody else going along with this. So it gave me a chance to look at religious belief and the large cast of characters that you're afforded in fantasy means I can have people who don't think about religion at all. I can have people who think that the corruption in the church means it's all corrupt, it's all crap. Everything about it is terrible. We should get rid of it. I have people who have a longing for old pagan beliefs. I have people who are using sort of the main church for purely power ends, and people who are using the problems in the church purely for power ends. And then I have good people in between. So it's a lovely canvas where I can explore those problems and those things that they really bother me. Like how can people who say they believe this do this? And does that nullify everything that they say when the actions of these people are contrary to what they say they believe, and they're at this position in an institution? Does that nullify all the good that everybody else does?
I think that's fascinating. And I think, as you say, that's the beauty of creating this fantastical world, to look at those really huge questions. Ahmed, what would you say is perhaps the kind of the underbelly of your writing as well? Would you say that overt religious or belief systems are fueling the narrative? I'll let you expand on that.
My writing, I mean, when I started writing, I was always thinking about this point. This is a very important point, because once you talk about religion, you talk about God, you talk about what your characters believe in, then you have to take that route and you have to explain it in a wider, sense, I believe. So I was asking myself, do I want my world and my characters to believe in something? Do I want them to have a higher power that they relate to or they go back to when they are in trouble? Is there a God? Is there is there devil, for example? Is there any prayers they have to do or sacred customs? So growing up, I've watched many. When I was young and I was watching all these cartoons, and these cartoons were coming from all around the world, like Japan, I think the US, Europe, and there were many of these cartoons that showed, for example, the churches, and the Christianity. But I thought that if I would keep my world, just a fight between good and evil. That's it, without, entering into religion and going so deep, because I would be in conflict with myself. I mean, do they believe in, as what Brent said just now, are they believers? Are they pagans? Are there, so this is something which I really find it very sensitive, in my writing, and especially that my genre is, the book is focused to the middle grade children. It would be confusing for them. And maybe if it's going to reach up to young adults, maybe later, I'm not sure. But at the moment, I would really avoid entering into this. So it will be more or less like a fight between good and evil. That's more.
I think that makes absolute sense, and it's very fair for you to give us that great kind of context behind your work. And of course, you have your religious singing, and you're critically acclaimed for this. So I can see where it's refreshing for you to actually create this kind of fantasy world and delve into other issues. I think something that you do brilliantly, Ahmed, and I'm going to throw a question to you straight off the back of this, is extending our theme today, belief systems, to the idea of self-belief. Yourself and Brent, some of your main characters, you give us the readers, a wonderful kind of insight into their internal world. And when I speak about self-belief, mainly it's a kind of a lack of self-belief. So I wanted you to maybe give us an insight, Ahmed, in terms of how you constructed the main protagonist, Aju. He's described from the very beginning, this isn't a spoiler, as an outsider, no friends, abandoned, it would seem, by his father, dreaming of his dead mother. So this idea that this kind of haunts him, and there's a particular point when he's faced with a challenge and he's being tested and he's being asked to, make a decision on whether he accepts the challenge or not. And again, I'm not going to give any spoilers. I'm going to be very cryptic and vague here, people. But I just wanted you to maybe expand on this idea of what do you do to internalize the thought process of these characters? How do you convey a sense of like self-belief or lack of self-belief, and how they go through that kind of journey?
Yes, so this is a very important question. Thank you, Amandeep. When you have your main character, which is the protagonist, of course, the protagonist would have flaws, right? And then if he's a hero and from the start and he knows what's going to happen and what he's doing, then the readers are like bored with this. The readers want to see a hero which is more or less like them, going through troubles or going through issues, have many inside issues going through that so what I did is that I created Aju in a way that he lost his mother, his father, and then his brother was kidnapped. He was literally an outsider in his village. Nobody wanted him, because of his father claiming that, he knew that dragons existed when this was something like more a fiction. So going through that, I mean, we ourselves go through things like this. So I saw myself in a lot of what I created when I created the characters. I saw a lot of the feelings that I had. I put them in these characters. So I designed the characters in such a way that they have the flows, and then they go through an arc. This arc where they start, and they don't want to do it. They are not confident. They are afraid, and then they are thrown into this situation that they have to make a decision. Either they go ahead and they don't know if they're going to be alive or they're going to die or they're going to come back, or they just quit. So I believe that yes, and in a point of time, the main character, the protagonist, goes through a decision of which actually he has to decide. Either he has to go ahead or he has to go back. So I feel this is the way that my characters are based on.
And connecting into this, if I can bring in Brent at this point, maybe if we can build on what Ahmed said there about the character development. Of course, you have one of your central characters, and both of you have a lot in common in terms of your writing multiple POVs with the character of Kip. If we can maybe bring in the idea of magic systems, which you do brilliantly, Brent. You artfully create such a sophisticated magic system. I'll let you describe it in your own words, but I love the fact that you don't spoon feed it to us, you kind of drip feed it in, and there's no info dumping, like we're learning about it as the book goes along. And there was one key thing linking into what we just discussed with Ahmed there about self-belief. I think I'm right in saying that Kip's kind of learning of this magic system, without giving too much away, his experimentation is tied in. So the knowledge as well as the self-belief, they're kind of in parallel and they kind of move along. And again, your wonderful character development, it's not linear. There is times in which we can see Kip's self-belief growing, and there's other times that it wanes. But less of me talking and more of you. If you can maybe address those 2 points about character development, self-belief, and the magic system that's connected to that as well.
Yeah, so the magic system in Lightbringer is based it's based on light, and it's based on colors, and so I wanted something that was simultaneously understandable but would have levels of complexity. So in this world, if you sort of think of like what happens when you burn a candle, you have a physical thing, and you light the wick, and it turns into heat and light, right? Well, in this world, it's kind of the opposite. You have these magicians, these drafters, and they take light and different colors of light. They make physical stuff out of it, so they can create things. And then on top of that, I layered that each substance has its own properties. Above that, each kind of magic you use has effects on you. So if you're drafting red, it makes you more of an angry person. It pushes you along. Green makes you a little wilder. Blue makes you a little more icy and rational. And I tried to tie these things to things that readers can understand. So the magic system there has, because it has emotional effects on the reader, it gives me excuses emotional effects on the characters. It gives me excuses to explore the characters and their growth. So in this book, we have because light is so tied to the magic. It's also, I had a lot of optical things that I could play with. And light and colors are where in real life, the objective meets the subjective. Like there are people who are colorblind. Colors are at certain wavelengths of light. Okay, here's 460 nanometers. That's red, or what have you. So it gave me a chance to talk about perspective, and that gave me. We have Kip, and he's a fat kid. And he believes just terrible things about himself because he grows up in an abusive environment. Things are really bad for him. And over time, we see how Kip changes, and he changes physically. But as you noticed, I'm glad you noticed. He goes forward and then he takes a step back. He goes forward, he takes a step back. So by the end of the series, like he's still struggling with that. He believes himself to be a fat kid. Everybody around him realizes, like, dude, you've changed. You know, you've been training as a warrior. You are not that fat kid anymore. But Kip doesn't see it. And because we're in his head, it takes us a while to understand that what Kip believes is false. And so that our own beliefs about ourselves can be false is something that I wanted to look at. At the same time, the other main character is his father. Kip is a bastard of Gavin Guile, who's kind of the emperor of the world. So I had the highest of the high, and Gavin is one of those really irritating people. He's good looking, he's powerful, he's rich, he's charismatic. Everybody likes him, and Kip is kind of his opposite. So they play off of each other. But Gavin also has a lot of places to grow. He's an arrogant guy, and he has some humility to learn, and he's got blind spots. So this is another thing that I was able to look at. We go numerous novels before he realizes he has slaves, and he doesn't think of them. He doesn't think of them as human beings at all. And it's like he's got this moral blind spot that I think can let us look at our own blind spots and look at our own privileges. Like, how do we treat people who serve us? Do we see them at all? Do we see people who are below us on scale? So these two characters gave things to play off each other with.
I think that completely sums up the way that one can kind of dissect the characters that you've created there, Brent. And I think it's really interesting. There's one particular quote that struck me when Gavin talks about finding out about his son, and he's asked by a character, well, why did you take him? Why did you accept him? Because of course society is now going to question you. And he says, because I know what it's like to be alone. And that struck me because it came at a point in the book where perhaps we didn't actually think this very strong character had his flaws, his fallibilities. And both of you do this brilliantly, Ahmed and Brent, because you, with your multiple POVs, you give the reader a chance to actually go into the internal minds of your characters, many of your characters. And I think it's very topical at the moment with the pandemic. People are talking about mental health and the negative self-talk, and perhaps is being a little bit more highlighted. Maybe because we've been all a little bit more kind of isolated and having a little bit more time at home to think about these things. So I think it was a very timely moment to read both of your books. On this point about the multiple POVs, I'm going to bring in Ahmed here. You told me before this session, you quite like writing dark characters, and you like dark characters in general. Tell me how you got yourself into the mind of, you've got multiple villains in your first book, The Beast of Furia, the first book of the Dragon Boy series. How did you come up with the villains? And they take different shapes as well. I'm not going to give too much away, but I'll let you describe that.
That's a very good question, because I mean, if you see most of the authors, they always support the protagonist, and you know, everybody loves the protagonist. But every time I read a book, I see that the antagonist has not got its complete, you know, value in the book. And I said to myself, whenever even I'm watching a movie or I'm reading a book, the antagonist always seems to be huge, but then dies so fast. Or let's say, you know, then I said to myself, no, if I want to really write a book, I need to show, you know, that my antagonist is huge and powerful, and then he can destroy the whole world. And then for that, you need to bring up a powerful protagonist as well. So that idea gave me the way of how to bring somebody from nothing, to a level that he can be a match to this, a huge antagonist, right? But the funny part is that every time I wrote a scene, for the antagonist, for a villain, let's say, or for a witch, or for a warlock, I enjoyed, the darkness, and I enjoyed how they really wanted to, for example, kill somebody, or for example, bewitch somebody, or for example, do something bad. I don't know why I enjoyed it so much, and I kept on, putting more dark stuff, because maybe, when you see it on a screen, or see it in a movie, you see all that magic happening and all that imagination happening more with the because it's always in our heads that the magic and the dark stuff is happening all from the antagonists. Like, they are the ones who come from that background, So yes, when I wanted to see a human being transforming into a dragon, for example, into a creature, most of the times you see this in a movie, they skip that transformation part, and then they show you that, okay, from a man, it's automatically there's a dragon. But in the book, what I did is that I transformed him bit by bit, showing every part. Like, I don't know if you've seen that movie, Werewolf in London, I think. There was this movie that they showed how that guy to transform into a werewolf. I think maybe that's the only movie at that time that they showed it, how the transformation happened. But in my book, I made sure that every line a villain said, or every action they took, it was really memorable and remarkable, and it really scared the tooth out of me. That's what I can say. Yeah, sorry about that.
Well, I saw Brent nodding along to the points that you were making there, Ahmed. So I think it's only fair that we bring in Brent to give us his insight, because Ahmed shared a lot there, Brent. So I think maybe you also need to give us an insight into how you get your mind into you've got such a variety of villains. I mean, you've got like the classic bad guy leading a bad army, but the assassin types. And then, of course, because you put us into the point of view of your characters, and there's the psychological thriller type characters as well. It's very uncomfortable and awkward at times for the reader. But, we continue. Tell us how you conjure that dark world up.
Well, first, a part of me was nodding along, because I just read that part, Ahmed, last night, where there's that transformation. I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. This is so fun and kind of gross as the guy's transforming into the dragon. What the? I can't look away. So I really love how you did that. So sorry, totally distracted there.
Both Ahmed and I appreciate that feedback there, Brent. Yes. Thank you for that. But you don't get away with it now. You now tell us about the evil world that lurks in your head.
Yeah, it's one of the great things about writing villains is like they can say just the worst things, and I was writing the last book, and like, even though I've written 7 books, in my 8th book, I wrote this line that I have this character that I just really love. He's kind of a villain. He's kind of an anti-hero, and he's kind of a villain. And I love to blur those lines a little bit, but he like writes this line. He's so cruel to people we like, and I wrote this line, and I was like, oh, can I say that? That's so hurtful. That's so hurtful. And anybody who's gone through this life circumstance, like, is going to be so peeved, and rightly so, because what he says is just so cruel. He talks to. I won't give the spoiler. Sorry. But villains give us kind of a chance to touch our own dark sides, right? Like so to me, it's not like touching my own, depth of villainy. It's like all the different villains give me reasons to touch all of my different depths of villainy. So it's really fun to find different ways that people justify themselves, and to try to explore a little bit. And this is something a lot of writers say everybody's the hero of their own story, and I don't totally believe that. It's true to a certain extent, but like there is monstrosity in our world. There are psychopaths. There are people who just don't care, and it's important not to glamorize that too much. So I like read some mental health books and I read about psychopaths. How do these people actually operate in the world? How does that go for them? But that's only like one villain. And then there's other people who are kind of the hero of their own story, who are like, I need to do this thing, and anybody who gets in my way needs to move or die, because what I'm doing is so important that your feelings just don't matter. So like when you have that ends justifies the means kind of mindset, you can do all sorts of awful things. I'm the only person who is smart enough and strong enough to save the world. So you need to get out of my way. And if you're going to stop me, you're stopping me from saving the world. So you need to die. I like to explore that place where we like to think that that rulers of countries have like a different set of morality. Like we don't think it's okay for us to kill people, but we're okay with going to war. Like, or at least under certain circumstances, we're okay with that. Like, why is that? Like, where do those lines come? When is that okay? When is it okay to say, I want you guys to die for me because I'm just that important? And that can blur into villainy pretty easily. I think is true. So I like to explore those things. There's people who are villainous on very, they're vain or they like to say cutting things and all the way up. And the heroes can be villainous and the villains can be heroic. I like to trade on that without ever excusing evil, which I think is real. So.
I think you've picked up on so many points there. You've given us such an insight. There's so much that we can delve into, but with the time being limited, just a couple of things there. I think it's interesting to hear about the level of research. As you say, you read into books about psychopaths and their mental kind of health. And I think it shows the kind of the depth of the research that's gone into what you've created. Often fantasy world, sci-fi gets kind of possibly stereotyped in certain plots, but I think both what you and Ahmed do brilliantly is you use those fantastical worlds that you create to deliver some really universal messages. So what you've talked about there, Brent, and Ahmed as well, some very kind of universal kind of flaws of humanity, but of course in this fantasy world. And I think staying with you, Brent, one of the beauties of the sheer volume of characters that you've created, which I appreciate, this is book one of the whole series, and the nuance and subtleties. There's characters, as we've just talked about, because of course shortage of time, so we're simply using terms like good and bad and evil and good, etc. However, the subtleties and nuances of certain characters and the transformation they go through, I mean, it extends to every single character you've created, Brent. And one particular character that really struck me was Liv. Now, Liv's this brilliant character because she starts at the lower social end of the social spectrum, I should say. And through her mouth, this is an internal quote. It's in chapter 44. And she's kind of looking at social mobility and also the kind of the hierarchy of the world and saying, maybe when you are born on the top of the mountain, you could pretend that the mountain didn't matter. But those who climbed it and those born at its base who would never climb it at all, they knew differently. So that's one point where we have this like internal insight in terms of what she's thinking. And then if we skip a little bit further ahead to 61, chapter 61, she then goes on to reveal just to us, she says, actually, maybe this is between Liv and Kip, actually. And she says, maybe I didn't hate the hierarchy. Maybe I just hated being at the bottom of it. So every time I enjoy something, it feels like confirmation that I'm a hypocrite. And she turns to Kip and says, we can be friends and we can remind each other about where we came from. A little bit like Drake, started from the bottom. And I just wanted to say to you, Brent, I just thought it's fantastic how the social commentary, social mobility, questioning hierarchies, the fantasy world plane allows one to do that. How did you construct it yourself when you thought about this pressing question?
Well, I I looked at Liv and looked at, where is she from, and then how can she? So Liv and Kip are they're both outsiders. They're both from the same small village, and they've come kind of to the capital city, if you will, and they're kind of dealing with this very rigid hierarchy and dealing with the center of the world. It's like you move to New York City, or you move to London, or you move wherever, and like all of a sudden you're at the bottom of the pyramid and you have to deal with that. And so Liv is kind of like the college kid or the young adult who goes like, I hate your system. Everything about this is crap. And the thing is, like, they're not wrong. They're not wrong. Like when you look around the world, you go, really? This is the best we could do? And a lot of us kind of lose that anger as we go along. Like, oh yeah, I was 16 and angry, and we dismiss it. And actually young adults are right to be mad. I mean, it's like, right now, millennials in the US are like, we can never afford a house. I could never afford to buy a house. My parents were able, boomers were able to buy a house for 1 year's salary. For me, it would be 50 years salary. It's like, those people are right to be mad. And so in fantasy here by taking these characters from one area, I'm able to, like what I love about fantasy is all of us have our own set political opinions or our moral opinions. And what fantasy is able to do, I kind of think of it as like it puts us on an airplane, and we get to go up, and it pulls us away from our opinions. And it's like all of a sudden you look down and you look at your own city, and you're like, I never realized I was living in a slum. Like right over that hedge, there's palaces, or maybe I didn't realize I was growing up in palaces, and right over the hedge, there's slums. I never see those in my real life. So that change in position, I think, takes us away from our own biases about, in the real world, people who are poor because they made all these bad decisions or whatever. Or people in the real world who are rich, they're rich because they're exploiting X, Y, or Z. Like we have all these opinions already that we come to think. And in fantasy, it's like, this is a different world. There's different rules. Oh, what are the rules here? How do people understand themselves? It's like, now you understand somebody who's an outsider looking in. And you understand them from their own perspective. And you understand, I hope you understand why Liv is angry and why she's right to be angry. And where she goes with that might not be where you would hope she would go. She might not go the right direction. And that's something I always let my characters do. It's like, if they get to a place where rationally, with what they know, with what they believe, with what they've been told, and Liv has been told a lot of lies, that they would turn a certain direction, it's like, okay, either I've got to go back and change everything if I want this character to go a certain direction, or I've got to let her turn left. And so I try to give my characters that dignity of like, if this is what I've told you, this is what she's going to do. So I hope it's like that you can understand where people go wrong when they do, and that should bother you a little bit. And I mean, I hope it bothers you a little bit sometimes.
I completely agree with you, and I think that's the beauty of the fantasy world. I mean, I began by saying I'm immersed in the factual storytelling from my BBC News days and being a journalist. But sometimes these types of critiques, questions, debates that we have with friends, outer circles, etc., can get very heavy very quickly. And what I found with the world that you'd created was that one suspends those political, religious, kind of like the baggage that you bring along. And then you're suddenly thrown into a situation about critiquing a hierarchy, and it kind of catches you off guard. And that's kind of wonderful, because it can be wonderfully eye-opening. And I think that can be one of the beauties of the fantasy world. I'm going to bring in Ahmed at this point, because of course, Ahmed, your fantasy world is very rich, and you do something similar to Brent when you are introducing the reader to different environments. Both one of Brent's main characters, Kip, and your main character, Aju, they leave their home. So Aju leaves at Chikara, and he goes into the new world. Well, firstly, like the deadly forest, and also this glorious world of Safamir. And you describe it in such technicolor detail. how long did it take you to construct this world? And I know, of course, The Beast of Furia, your book one, is just an introduction, and you're going to go back there, I'm sure. But again, this multi-layered world that you create and how you show it to us through the eyes of this newcomer.
Well, I would answer this question, but I would also want to ask Brent a question as well.
Oh,
but
yes, please
you
do.
can tell me when, but after I answer this question, maybe I could ask him now that he's here, because Brent is a huge author, you know, with multi-millions of books, and we are just starting to to enter the publishing world. So maybe we can also, me and the viewers can take some advices from Brent, if you don't mind, Brent, that is.
Absolutely.
And you, Amandeep, of course. But yeah, I mean, Aju as a sad character who has lost his parents and siblings, you know, now that he has no life anymore, decides to leave his village, but then stumbles into this forest, and then in this forest there is transforming human to a dragon, which gives birth to a baby, which is host to a dark beast, and the whole magical world is actually behind this dark entity, because if whoever puts their hands on it, you know, it's either, if it's good, the good ones, it's going to be good. If it's the bad ones, that this whole world is going to be destroyed. And then when I was constructing the story, I had these outlines in my head, and I wanted to say, you know what, Aju would go from this point to this point, and then how he would actually meet all the characters in the story, and how he ended up in the forest, and then from the forest he ended up in Sapphomere, who he meets, you know, all the sentinels and the queen, who then, you know, decide that, you know, this baby who is actually a host to the dark entity should be, you know, hidden from the evil guys. And as I was writing, the whole world started to open up for me. I mean, I cannot describe it, to be honest, because when I was doing it, I was just an amateur into writing. I wasn't like a, you know, like an expert writer, but how I was progressing, and how my feelings, and because when I was writing it, as I felt as if I was Aju myself, and I was in this situation, and sometimes I even acted the scenes myself before even writing them. So as the story progressed, I saw myself in Sapphomere, and then I saw myself going back to my village, which then didn't happen, because then there's the witches, they found out that Aju was going back to his village with the baby, and they kidnapped the baby, and then now Aju had to decide. And here where the faith comes in, because now he has a way to get out, and but you know, the other world's relying on him to save them, you know, to take the baby with him. And this is where he knows that if he goes back, there's nobody waiting for him anymore. But if he stays here, all these, you know, creatures, they're relying on him. So he decides here, you know what, I'm going to go ahead, you know, it's a matter of life and death, I'm going to save them. And the more I wrote, the more I saw myself in it. And I sometimes, I don't know, I'm even Brent maybe agrees with me, you know, it gives me also the, you know, the strength to go back to my life, you know, and say, you know, if my characters could do this, I could do this too in my real life, you know. I don't know, what do you think, Brent?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's the things that we write, I think, move us first, right? I think Robert Frost said, "No tears in the writer, no tears in the reader," and so there's something about when you go deep with a character, you know it, and it touches your own heart first. So. And by the way, you've got a brilliant imagination. Don't worry about being. I'm not a professional writer. When I made this up, it's like you could have fooled me. It's a wonderful world. It's very bright and vivid, and it's really fun. So,
thank you, Brent. Mm-hmm. Can I ask the question now?
Yes, please go ahead. I'll just go and get a cup of coffee, shall I?
No, I'm sorry.
I'm joking. Go ahead, Ahmed. Go on.
Just I wanted to ask Brent, you know, how did you start writing, and what made you actually come into the writing world? And when you finished your first book, you know, it was 600 pages long, and you know that when you have such a big book, you go to an agent or you go to a publisher, they would say, "Oh, this is such a huge book. Nobody would read this much." I mean, you being also just a beginner when you just started writing, So if you just can give us something about how you did it and what was the process and how did you manage to get the 600 pages book published?
It's very dangerous to ask an epic fantasy author to tell you a story because like we'll be here 2 hours from now. But I'll try to answer briefly. My writing journey, I think, started at age 13. I started my first novel, and I'd read Edgar Allan Poe, and Edgar Allan Poe, who was a super weird dude, but in reading his books, in reading his short stories, I saw a beauty of language, but I also saw a guy who was deeply isolated, like a deeply lonely man who was not appreciated and knew it and felt overlooked. And I felt that way. I was in 7th grade and I was like, I feel like I'm friends with this person who's been dead for like 150 years. And like, it was so important to me, like what books could do. So how a book could reach through time and help out a kid like me and help me not feel alone. I was like, I want to do that. I want to do that for other people. I want to return that favor. So I wanted to be a writer from early on. I went through college. I thought about getting a real job, and I thought, what I want to do first is I know I want to write. I know that almost nobody is able to write. Like, this is not a realistic dream. It's like everybody wants to be a rock star. Yeah, how many people actually make a living as a rock star? How many people get to sing for a living? Ahmed, it just doesn't happen, right? So I was like,
anything.
Not really. Yeah, that's no.
I think that's an invitation for a duet live at the Abu Dhabi.
Yeah. I should never have said anything. So I decided, what, I'm going to do. I'm going to fail early. I'm going to get this out of my system. I'm going to write a book. I'm going to try to get published. It's not going to happen, and then I'll quit and I'll get a normal job like everybody else. And so I started. I got through college. I started writing my book right away. I sort of picked up jobs on the side to just make it. I tended bar for a little while. That was a terrible job. I taught high school for a year. I wrote nothing while I taught because teaching is a very creative job, as it turns out. And then when I got married, my wife said, I think this is your dream. I think you need to do this full time. And so we lived really poor. And the years passed, and I was writing, every day and writing, and she was making the money for us, and we lived lean. And after a couple of years, I sent it out to agents, and I sent it to 31 agents. I limited it to agents I would actually want to have because it's such an important relationship. And I got 15 rejections, and I got 3 people who were kind of interested and said, show me some more. And then the rest I'm still waiting to hear from. So some didn't even bother to reply. And of those, 2 dropped out. And I was down to the last agent who was still kind of interested was also my first choice agent. It was like the agent I was like, this is the guy I wanted. Out of the 31, if I could have picked one, it'd be this guy. And he was taking forever to get back to me. Like it was like 8 months. And I was like, if this guy says no, it might be time to get a real job. And so that was a real faith moment for my wife and I. I was like, okay, if it'll be time to move on, and I flushed 3-4 years of my life. Bummer, that'll suck. I'll have to figure out what to do with my life. So and then he agreed to represent me. Very good agent, Don Moss, in New York City. And I thought, surely now I'll get a book deal in days. He's a great agent. Everybody trusts him. And it was 2 years. It was 2 years where he was sending it around. Finally, somebody was interested. And the guy was like, you know what? This is great. And he's like, do you have more? Because he'd heard I had more. Because I did this stupid thing where I started writing book 2. Even though I was like, the smart thing is to write another book 1 of a different trilogy in case nobody buys this, because if nobody buys book 1, if no publisher buys book 1, why would they buy book 2? So I need to write 2 different book 1s. I need to have multiple different worlds. And instead my wife said, well, what are you passionate about writing? And I said, I want to write book 2. And so she's like, you got to write what you're passionate about. So I wrote book 2. I was partway through writing book 3, and this editor comes to me. He's like, I think this is fantastic. I want to do this thing that hasn't been done before in fantasy. It's been done like in romance, and we're going to take all 3 books. We're going to publish them rapidly. So you just got to get them done, and then it'd go out in the market and make a big splash. And I was like, fantastic, that's so great. And he's like, okay, I'm writing up the contract right now. And then he got fired. And nobody else was interested. And then a year passed while nobody was interested. And he landed on his feet somewhere else. And he's like, I'm back. I'm still interested. And then like it's so infuriating. It's like Hollywood and everywhere. Somebody's interested. Now everybody's interested. It's like, you guys wouldn't give me the time of day yesterday. And now I have a bunch of different publishing companies interested. So they called up my agent and somebody did a preemptive offer, and my agent said no. So preemptive offer is like, here, I don't want to go to a bid. I don't want to go to an auction where everybody gets to try to bid up the money. He said, I'll give you $60,000 for these three books. And my agent said no. And this is why you have an agent, because I would have given the rights to those books for a Big Mac. So Tim at Orbit called up, half an hour later and said, okay, well, we'll give you 75. And at that point we said yes. So they took the idea that the other guy had, and they're like, hey, let's do that. And they published the books rapidly. So the books came out, I think in successive months. And readers loved it. They loved it. If you like book one, you could buy book two right away. If you like book two, you could buy book three right away. You don't have to wait. Booksellers liked it because they didn't have to keep it on the shelves for super long to see if it would sell. So it turned out to be this brilliant thing. And it looked like a stupid thing, but it turned out to serve really well. So I don't know if it's always the best thing to advise people to follow their passion, but it's what I did, and it worked out for me. So I was obviously highly fortunate, blessed, I would say. So, yeah.
Oh, wow, Ahmed, that was such a brilliant question. And Brent, thank you so much for taking us through that journey of yours in such a candid way, but also you're so humble and modest. And of course, we know the success of the series now. So we're holding on to your inspiring story, the aspiring writers amongst us, Ahmed as well. We're all just holding on to the inspiration that you shared with us there. A little insight, for those people that don't know, Brent's got some wonderful advice on his website, both in general about writing and also about the fantasy world creating as well. So I definitely highly recommend that. There's so much more I can speak to you both about. I haven't even had a chance to delve into both of the way that you both create brilliant fight scenes, from Ahmed launching the very first scene of the Beast of Furia with a fight scene and the sister and brother combat team, to Brent's masterful way of describing different fight scenes, depending on which character's point of view we're looking through. The fight scene adapts and it evolves in its own way. So maybe that's for a future edition, because I really feel we need to get you both gentlemen here in person in Abu Dhabi for a future session, because I could talk to you both forever. And then Ahmed will send me off and ask you more questions, I'm sure, Brent. But on that note, I want to say thank you to you both for joining us, and a quick thank you to some of the sponsors of this event, the Arabic Language Center for organizing this book fair, the AV and volunteer team that are making this possible, virtual and in person. And of course, again, to say thank you to both of you for your time. I'm going to respect it and let you go. But can I please say autographs next time? Ahmed, hard copy of your book published next time as well, because we want to have you both in Abu Dhabi for more. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure, and I would love to meet you both in person. That would be great.
There you go. We have witnesses that said it. They heard. Thank you so much, Brent. Thank you so much, Ahmed.